So welcome everyone to this IES webinar, A Day in the Life of a Land Condition Professional. This webinar series, A Day in the Life, will share stories and perspectives from environmental professionals working across specialisms and sectors. The series will highlight the breadth of environmental careers and the diversity of routes into the sector. This particular webinar is part of a subset of the series focused on land condition professionals and has been organised by our land condition community, which I'll post some information about in the chat shortly. We're delighted today to be joined by Elaine White, Associate Technical Director at Arcadis Consulting Limited, who is also a member of our land condition community. As always with our webinars, there will be a chance for questions at the end of Elaine's presentation, so please do submit these, and you can do so by using the Q&A option, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And you can do this at any point during the presentation, and I'll then ask these on your behalf later on. A massive thank you to you, Elaine, and over to you.
Thanks very much. So thanks everyone for joining. Hopefully this is going to be interesting and useful to people. It was certainly really interesting for me, actually, just being posed the question of what does a day in the life look like for me? You know, that's quite a broad question. So I've got some slides put together to just run through, but I really sort of thought about the 16 years I've been working in the industry and kind of reflecting on the fact that actually a day in the life has changed really significantly depending on which part of my career I pick. So I'm going to try and do a little bit of a kind of journey through how I've ended up where I am now as an ATD. I'm going to start off with a little bit of background about my education and how I got interested in the sector in the first place. And then I'm really going to look at three sort of different phases of my career, because in my mind, I think there's a real big difference between the kind of early years where I was really, you know, learning the ropes, getting to grips with the industry, kind of understanding some of the kind of issues and some of the focuses. The mid years where I learned a bit more about kind of putting those pieces together and what it all means. And then the kind of later years where I am now, which is much more about the kind of bigger picture, looking at kind of strategic level stuff and also looking at upskilling and what the next generation looks like and what the future looks like for the industry. So just a quick one on my educational background. So at college, I did sciences. So I did chemistry, biology and geology. And by far and away, geology was my favourite thing. I absolutely loved it. I really enjoyed the kind of practical feel of it, the fact you can go out and interact with it on a kind of day-to-day basis. So then I went off to the University of Bristol and I did my degree in geology there. So I did their 4-year MSci programme. And I did my main sort of 4th year project actually on a volcano in Santorini, which sounds a lot more flashy than it was. So I was looking at scoria bomb formation, and there's a few photos and kind of images from my thesis up on there, but lots of kind of getting out and looking at geology in real life and doing loads of field trips, which was obviously fantastic and a really big draw to geology as a discipline. But I also had a fantastic opportunity between my 3rd and 4th years where I did some summer work at a mine remediation site. And again, that was just really brilliant kind of example of practically being able to interact with what you're thinking about and being able to go and look at things in real life and actually seeing these things for yourself and not having it as an abstract concept, but really something material that you can interact with. So I really enjoyed all the kind of practical aspects and all the sort of thinking about what it means and how you bring all these different pieces of information together in one place. But I did end up in a little bit of a kind of crunch point, I guess, at the end of my degree. I wasn't 100% sure where I needed to go. So it was a really big kind of decision point, I guess, for me. It wasn't necessarily a foregone conclusion as I approached the end of my degree exactly where I was going, but I knew some definite things. I knew I really definitely didn't want to do any more academia. I'd really enjoyed my time at uni, but I was definitely ready for a bit of a change of pace, a change of scene, you know, move to a different area of the country and just, you know, shake things up a bit, go and do something different. And I also knew I really didn't want to do a desk job. I'd absolutely loved all the field trips. I'd really enjoyed my summer work. And whilst I was completely happy to do the kind of the studying side of university, there's nothing quite like being able to, you know, go off to Greece and have a look at some real live geology in action, or go and, you know, work down a mine for a month or two. Who gets to do that? So I really knew I wanted something which let me get out and actually see things and actually do things and that kind of practical side of it. And I guess from more of a I guess, holistic level, I wanted to do something that I could be proud of. I wanted to do something where I felt like I was making things better in some format. And when I was looking at that as a sort of a principle of what kind of jobs were on the market and what kind of things could I apply for and what could my skills be useful for, that was when I really became much more aware of land condition and sort of, land contamination and the interactions and, all the use of scientific principles and all of the things I was doing in my degree about cross sections and thinking about what the below ground structures look like and how those things interact. It just felt to me like a really natural fit. And the more I read about it, the more I just felt like this is something I can do where I really feel like I'm actually making a difference. I'm making an improvement. It's something I can, stand by and be proud of as a career. So I applied in quite a few places. And I ended up choosing to go with Arcadis, who are a pretty long-standing company. Back when I joined, it was working in Newmarket in East Anglia. We now have offices all over the place. And a much stronger kind of environmental sort of focus in many more of our offices. And I've just stayed there ever since because I think it's fantastic. I love the company, I love the people, and I love the work. And I think part of the reason that I've stayed there so long is I've had the opportunity to really move around different focuses whilst I've been there. So it's absolutely not the case that for the 16 years I've been there, I've just been doing exactly the same thing day in, day out, churning things out by rotation. It's really, really changed throughout my career and changed throughout the different projects I've worked on. So like I say, I've tried to kind of divide it up into the three kind of eras, I suppose, of my career, and then looked at a bit of what those different stages looked like. Because had I taken a slightly different career route, I probably could have stayed at any one of those stages for my whole career and been totally happy, because there's so much variety just within every single day. So having a look at my early career, I might not have been so aware of it at the time, but in retrospect, one of the most important things that I did was just get out there and just see real sites and see real data being collected in real time, because it's certainly really challenging to actually understand how to use data and how to figure out what the bigger picture is and how to build that data into something actually meaningful for your site if you don't have that context of where the data comes from in the first place. So I spent lots and lots of time doing site work. Basically, probably the first 4 to 5 years, I'd say, of my career was pretty much constantly out on site. So that involved lots of supervising of contractors. I spent a lot of time logging borehole arisings, which is great because you obviously take all of that slightly abstract understanding of soil structures and rock structures and then actually see what that looks like in real life. Lots of different types of rigs and working out how you approach different sites and different geologies to get the best information out of them. Lots of sort of designing monitoring wells and designing installations and working out how to get wells in the right place and how to navigate around sites, and taking the soil samples, taking the groundwater samples, but also lots of kind of broader skills just around dealing with people. Obviously the sites that you work have people who work there, they have the subcontractors that you're working with, they have lots of different needs, lots of different stakeholders. Sometimes you might have residents next door, sometimes you're working on a massive industrial site, sometimes the health and safety protocols are really restrictive, sometimes you're kind of left to your own devices. There's loads and loads and loads of different ways and means of getting this data, and you sort of have to think quite dynamically as you're doing it. You can plan it as best as you possibly can, but you'll quite often turn up and something's just not quite how you expected. And I really, really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the responsibility of it. I really enjoyed the autonomy of it. I really enjoyed the fact that you could kind of turn up and it was your little empire for the time when you were there, and you were the one who was, having those conversations and seeing the soil as it came out and deciding what you're going to do about it and going, actually, I need to move a location closer to here. I need to change up this. I need to adjust the scope. You got a lot of sort of flexibility and agility built into that, where you can actually be the one who, because you're seeing it, you get to, make some of those decisions. So that was fantastic. And I learned so much doing that. Lots of traveling around as well. So I got to see lots of different parts of the country, got to stay in loads of interesting places, got to meet loads of fantastic people. Some of the clients that I was working with when I was, in my first 2 or 3 years, I'm still working with now, just at a different level, because they're just really nice people. I really like working with them. And there's also like a whole kind of almost social side to site work, where you're obviously, staying away with your drill team or with your works team, or, maybe you're working in a little work group with different people. So there was loads of just kind of fun sides of it, social things in the evening. The picture in the middle of the little snowmen was when we had a really nice need to go and do some groundwater monitoring in a field just after it had snowed. So we, and just things like this is like the kind of perks where you just get to have a bit of fun, build those connections, meet those different people, get all those different viewpoints on it. And it was just brilliant, really, really good experience. And it really bedded in what all these things mean and how we get the data and how we can be sometimes limited and what we need to be aware of in terms of data constraints, and just a really, really strong foundation to sort of understanding what to do with it. But in terms of a sort of typical day, I guess, in those was lots of logistical planning of things, then sorting out all the equipment, managing kind of equipment bookings, talking to subcontractors, booking people in, talking to sites, talking to contractors, talking to clients, getting up there and then really interacting and sort of not just technically managing what you're doing in terms of making sure that the logging is happening and making sure the samples are happening, but all of those kind of other aspects, making sure you're not getting in the way, making sure you're being mindful of other people using sites. So it's quite a lot to bring together, but it's really, good fun. It's a nice thing to just have that level of control, and you get that sort of relatively early on in your career, so you don't feel like you have to work 5 years before you're ever allowed to make a decision by yourself. So that was probably, like I say, the first sort of 4 to 5 years or so. But unfortunately, site work can't last forever, or at least my knees definitely can't last forever. So looking more at the kind of middle of my career, it sort of was then moving into a bit more of, okay, well, so I know now how we collect all this data, but what do we do with it? Where does it go? And I'd sort of had some insights on that before, but I really started looking much more at the kind of reporting end and the data interrogation end, and taking all of that data that people like me have been collecting out on site and really putting it together in terms of what it means. And a massive, massive part of that for land condition is always going to be thinking about conceptual site models for the site. So bringing together all those different pieces of geology information and lab data, and where are the local rivers and where are the local receptors and what do we think is going on with groundwater, and trying to bring that together in one overall concept for the site, which can be laid down hopefully in a drawing or in something which you can use to actually communicate that information to the client or to the regulator or to the stakeholders. So lots and lots of time spent leaning into the skills I learned in my degree around how to draw cross sections and how to visually articulate information, because it can be quite hard for people who don't work in the industry to be able to sort of visualize what looks, what does below the ground look like. Some people are really visual and they just kind of get it, and some people really kind of struggle to interact with that. And we need to do, as land condition professionals, we need to be helping other people understand what this information means. So lots of time building CSMs and putting those pieces together, and also lots of time looking at the risk profiles. So like, okay, well, great, but so what does it all mean? Does it matter that this stuff is down there? So we do within the UK, within the sort of the different frameworks and regulatory advice that we work within, there's obviously a very strong risk-based approach that we've got here, which is quite different to some other countries. But there's some, really, really nice guidance out there to follow through. But you start actually getting into that for yourself and comparing things to different thresholds and working out what is a problem and what isn't a problem. And the main kind of sort of thought process for that is really around the kind of guiding principle of where you have your sources, your pathways, and your receptors. And so really I was in the space where I was starting to map those things out for myself and working out what it all means. But it was also where I started, I guess, raising my head above the parapet a little bit. So not only just looking at my individual projects and the particular client I was working with on that day, broadly about what other influence could I have, within my company, outside of my company, and how could I start being a little bit more influential with the information that I now sort of had. So one of the things which I got involved with, drafting committee of it's not new anymore, but at the time a new British standard on soil sampling. And that was a really fantastic experience. Again, just got to meet different people with different takes on things. Also, really interesting opportunity to sort of see behind the curtain of how British standards actually come to pass. Because, obviously, as professionals, we all use those kinds of documents day in, day out, and actually getting to see the process by which those come into being was a really interesting thing. And I mean, just a fantastic opportunity. So if anyone has an opportunity to get involved in something like that, I'd really recommend it. But also looking at starting to kind of upskill others. So handing on a lot of those skills which I'd got as a field consultant onto the next generation. There's a photo in the top right of one of our field skills weeks, which we run with some of our newer graduates, where we sort of mock up drill sites and mock up monitoring wells and things like that, but kind of getting a bit more involved in, what does the future look like and who we're bringing in, and how as an industry we kind of keep ourselves relevant and on top of the kind of more emerging aspects and kind of keep things going. It was also actually around this time that I jumped ship in terms of my professional body. So having done a geology degree, kind of felt like the natural fit was a geological society. And I just kind of kept on paying my subs and not really thinking about it, not necessarily really using the resources particularly well. And I guess it was in the mid-career where I really started thinking a bit more seriously about wanting to engage more broadly with the industry and wanting to think a bit more widely about where we're all going and what we need to do to make sure that we're doing the best job that we can. And that was when I joined the IES. They obviously had the land condition kind of aspects, and it was just much more affiliated with the things I'm passionate about and the things I'm interested in. So that was, also, I guess, the time when I pledged my allegiance. And it really kind of, the work that the IES does and the different communities which they have in there really matches quite a lot of the other kind of aspects of the job, which the more you start thinking about that kind of bigger picture and the conceptual site models and what does it all mean, you start almost thinking outside of just purely land condition and start thinking about, well, okay, what about the ecology which is in the area? What about the sort of the plans and the developments, and how can we clean up sites so that people can be using brownfield to build on rather than greenfield, and all that kind of bigger picture stuff. So there was also, I guess, a bit of a transition to kind of thinking a bit more outside the box. So I think when you're out on site and when you're a bit more junior, you're sort of very focused on the task in hand and kind of making sure you get everything done to a good quality. When you kind of take that one step higher up, it's a bit more about that kind of bigger picture and bringing in other people and bringing in other experts. And it can be as simple as, well, I know I need to drill a borehole in this area, but that area looks like it might have some ecological receptors, so I need to make sure that I'm being mindful of that. It can be around sort of health and safety management and, having a bit more interest in things like the British Drilling Association and kind of making sure we're keeping afresh with all of the moving standards there. But just a bit more of a kind of bigger picture view. So the day job then was much more desk-based, much more sort of thinking about things, much more mapping things out, and much more starting to reach out to other people, other communities, other specialisms, and trying to kind of bring things together in a much more holistic, sort of wide-reaching view, rather than just the kind of narrow to-do list that you're there to do on a sort of specific site for a specific client. And then more latterly, it's sort of almost gone one step up from there. So kind of starting from the kind of narrow field of vision when you're on site, getting stuff done, into that sort of slightly bigger picture where you start thinking about your project a bit more wide ranging. And now in a much more kind of wide view industry, where are we going next? Strategically, where might a client go next? What do we think is the next thing around the corner in terms of what we're going to need to be worried about? So this is where I've been at probably for the last 4 or 5 years. And it's a lot more about working collaboratively with clients and collaboratively with regulators to think about outcomes and how we get strategically from where we are with a site to a desired outcome, and working out what those different stages might be. So quite a lot of that, because I am still a land condition person, is focused on where we are in our understanding of what the issues and risks are, what that might look like in terms of remediation to get to a suitable endpoint that the regulators and the stakeholders are happy with. But it also goes beyond that. It is a bit of a moving target, and sort of There's always something around the corner which maybe hasn't had the kind of priority that it should do. I mean, at the moment, it's still sort of termed as an emerging contaminant, but obviously all of the conversations around PFOSs and PFAS is not really emerging. It's kind of been on the radar for quite a long time, but there's a lot more public perception around that kind of thing, which is sort of accelerating things a lot more in recent years. But now, with a bit more experience behind me, I'm kind of better placed to actually have my own opinions on some of those things and to be more involved in trying to align ourselves as an industry with how we can help people when those things come to pass. So one of the things which I look at a lot more these days than I did before is actually having wider reaching conversations with my clients about like what's bothering them and what do they see coming up. And that's also really opened my world up to even more other disciplines, because obviously lots of industrial and chemical clients especially, which has always been something which I've been quite focused in. They have so many permits and regulations and all these different things that they need to be keeping on top of. And actually, a lot of that does tie into land condition, or people are trying to expand their sites or build new things. And so they need planning, and that all comes back in and includes land condition as well. So you really start seeing the connections and the links and the way that it feeds into all these different processes, and how the thought process and the thinking and the kind of science or the application of the science techniques, you can kind of start fitting it into a lot of different places and start really making progress for people and kind of moving them closer to where they want to be. There's also been some sort of slightly more kind of cross-disciplinary stuff that I've been looking at more recently. So sort of thinking about how land condition and more specifically groundwater quality might feed into climate change and water scarcity, and how we're actually keeping our water balance appropriate in the UK, given large parts of the country are pretty sort of commonly in drought conditions, and how we're managing that, and how regional plans with water companies are going to start sort of playing in. And again, it kind of, on the face of it, things like that don't always feel like a natural fit for a land condition person to be getting involved in. But actually, loads of the skills which you pick up as a land condition professional do feed into all those things, because it's just all kind of interlinked behind the scenes. So that I found really enjoyable. And I have sort of continued my journey with upskilling and next generation and succession planning and things. So I've started running different training courses and talking to people about leadership skills and sort of trying to help other people kind of be where I've got to in terms of thinking a bit more about that bigger picture, in terms of maybe getting themselves out there to do a British Standard or, you know, a publication or a thought leadership piece or something like that, and kind of empowering us, because, you know, scientists are fantastic. We really know how to get stuff done, but sometimes we can be a little bit sort of self-effacing about not really backing ourselves and not really thinking that what we're doing is too useful, but what we're doing is absolutely critical, and we really need to kind of shout more as a community about how important land condition is and how it does kind of underpin all these other different things. You know, from obviously you have people who are very focused just from an environmental betterment perspective, obvious, natural fit, really easy. But, you know, even if you have a kind of hard-nosed building developer, well, they're still going to need to get planning. So they still are going to need to care about this stuff. They're still going to need to understand how these things work. And all sorts of different links like that exist everywhere if you go looking for them. And it's also just been a really nice chance to start going to, you start get the opportunity to go to some award ceremonies. You know, that's a picture there of the Brownfield Briefing Award that I was at last year, which was great fun. And sort of talking on conferences and just kind of getting the message out there, getting the word out there, and, you know, starting conversations with different people. It's always been interesting to kind of get other people's take on how things fit together, and, you know, that's how we all collectively move on. So just to sort of wrap it up into why is working in land condition amazing, because as you can hopefully tell, I'm extremely enthusiastic. 16 years has not ground me down. I would not want to be doing anything else. But I think the main kind of things which keep me here, keep me going, and keep me really loving my job is that every single site that you do is completely unique. You can have worked with a site which has the same kind of buildings on, but it's different contaminants, or you can work on a site where everything's the same, but the river is next door as opposed to a kilometre away. You always have oddities of where is the water flowing? How did this get here? What is the geology? Does it have a huge basement? Every single site is a puzzle, and you've got to pick all these different things and put them together. And it's just really good fun. It's really interesting. And because it's not kind of rinse and repeat, everyone's the same, every single day brings a new challenge. And linked to that is every day's a school day. You never stop learning. I mean, I don't really feel like I've been working for such a long time, but the industry's changed wildly in the time that I've been working. Back when I started, it felt much more that a lot more companies were kind of, if they were doing anything in the space, it's sort of because they were being forced to, it was sort of absolutely required of them. They couldn't get away with it anymore. Now there's a lot more public perception of land condition issues and water issues and groundwater issues. And that started partly just, the PR of that kind of slightly forces people's hands, and they sort of, have to be seen to be getting on board with it. But also the thing to remember is the people who work at our clients, they're people too. So in the same way that the general population is getting a little bit more aware of these issues and a little bit more, focus on it in that arena, well, those are the same human beings who end up working for our clients. So you just have individuals who are a little bit more sort of widely understanding what these issues are and why they're important. So everything kind of brings all these new challenges, and the culture and the climate in which we live always changes, and the pressures on that always change, and the sort of politics builds into it, and the science builds into it, and the emerging contaminants. But you never get bored because it's just constantly on the move. And because you get to do all these different things and meet these different people and, talk to people in other technical disciplines, you just get to work with loads of incredible people, from the clients, the subcontractors, the people at work, the other technical people you bring in, the people you meet in communities like this. There's just so many interesting people who are typically quite science background, and they're just interesting people to talk with. They just know these things which you have no idea of, and you could always find some really interesting conversation to have with someone who's passionate about what they do. So I've definitely had the benefit of an enormous amount of incredible people over the course of my working life. And there's also these days, it is a bit more of a kind of commonly understood topic area. People are much more aware of it than they were. And it means that now we do have these communities. We have these kind of wider reaching communities where you're not just talking to the people who you work with day to day. You can get involved with the IES, you can get involved in different thought leadership pieces, you can get involved in all these different kind of standards and policies and how these things work, even more like local action groups and things like that. There's just a lot more opportunity to kind of get yourself out there and build a community, but then actually that community being more active. So it doesn't feel so much like your work is just siloed to your day job, but you just kind of shut the door and leave it behind. It's just sort of infiltrates lots of different aspects where you can use all the skills you're getting and really start making a difference in a lot of different places, which I just find very, very pleasing. So I think that's pretty much bang on half an hour. I was trying to make sure I didn't go too far over, but hopefully that gives a bit of an insight into why I will never leave land condition.
Oh, thank you so much, Elaine. That was a fascinating insight into your career journey, and it's just so nice as well to see your kind of infectious enthusiasm about the sector. So thank you so much. We'll now go straight into the Q&A session. So all our attendees, please do put any questions you have for Elaine in the Q&A box. Just to kick things off, you spoke, Elaine, about kind of data, but it was a bit of a thread through some of your early and mid-career. I wonder if you just had any reflections on how the collection and analysis and use of data has changed over your career, and how you think it may change in the future. Obviously, it's a really, it's so related to technological development, so it's an area that's going to change a lot.
That's actually a really interesting question, and it's a funny thing because when I think back reflectively, it's weird how it's sort of gone in peaks and troughs, and some of the things which were sort of new and exciting when I started in 2007 then sort of slightly fell off the radar, and now are a bit like, oh, that's quite new and exciting again. So it's funny how you almost get fashions in these things, and a lot of that is kind of guided by the policies and the processes. I think in a lot of ways, in terms of the kind of technological innovations and the digital innovations, I do think that kind of construction related industry, and a lot of land condition does sort of tie into construction related industry, we have been kind of behind the times. I think we've been a little bit lucky that we haven't had so much kind of digital disruptors in our space kind of forcing us to kind of push out, but that's certainly happening a lot more now. I think that a lot of the sort of physical collection, it's sort of hard to substitute for actually getting soil out of the ground and looking at it, or getting groundwater out of the ground and actually testing it. And it's kind of difficult to see that changing significantly, but nonetheless, there are different kind of technologies like using, so there's, for example, a tool called the membrane interface probe, which is really good for looking for chlorinated volatiles. There's a sort of, you can get different permutations of it which work with different types of things. You get other ones which can work with tars, and you can get other ones which work with hydrocarbons and things like that. You can also have a lot more options these days in terms of slightly more sustainable choices you can make. So obviously, if you're using a tool which doesn't physically bring soil out of the ground, that means you don't have to then throw that soil away, so you don't have all the waste associated processes. That seems to be getting a bit more popularity these days. I think in terms of the significant changes that I've already really seen come in, it's a lot more about the data management side of it. So there's been a massive move, back in my day when I was like out there with my notepad getting rained on and using a hairdryer in the evening to try and salvage my notes. Now it's all done on tablets. Everything just syncs live, and it's really sped up the efficiency because you can have people in the office who are in real time seeing this stuff come in and building it as we go. It's also really improved health and safety measures because you can obviously much more easily keep on top of what safety checks have been done at different locations. So it's really made massive improvements for people's well-being at their job. Anyone who works in the industry wants everyone to come home safe at the end of the day. Site work can be, sort of on the face of it, quite hazardous. So that's really important. But then that data, obviously it's all digital from the offset pretty much. You get your digital data back from the lab, you have your digital site notes from the site. And we're seeing much more now how that can all kind of go up into a cloud-based system, then just come straight out into maps or into plume diagrams or into graphs of degradation. And there's a lot less manually transferring data between different spreadsheets. And also drones, to be honest. It's sort of feels a bit of an obvious thing to say, but when I think back to the hundreds and hundreds of photos I must have taken and putting them into a Word document, trying to get some kind of idea of a 360 around the site. And now you can just be like, just send someone out with a drone and then we'll have a massive 3D model and you can overlay all your contamination and utilities and everything on it. So couldn't have even dreamed of such a thing when I started in 2007. So I think what I'm trying to say is at the moment, it feels like it's a bit more about how we sort of record the data and then what we do with the data from there. But there are always kind of thoughts going on into how to make actual site investigation more sustainable from the offset in terms of the physical side. I expect there'll probably be more push in that direction as we sort of move forward.
Great, thank you. And slightly related to that, an attendee's asked, are there opportunities for full-time technological work relating to land condition data and data collection?
Yes, in terms of part of the kind of joy of it is you can choose to move through lots of different aspects and kind of keep moving on. And, I just sort of get itchy feet after usually about 4 to 5 years. I kind of need to just shake things up and move on. But we've absolutely got people who they just have a passion which lies in a particular place. You'll have, especially with digital, we've got lots of people who maybe have a bit of a history not dissimilar to mine in terms of going out and doing field work and understanding those things, but they really love working out how to get digital to work for us and how they can really play with that. And we've got people that's what they do now. They just focus on digital innovation and how they can specifically apply it to environmental sciences. And you can kind of pick any of the stages and just focus in that. And I kind of feel like that's part of the joy, because you can kind of find a place which is your happy spot. And then you can just kind of keep getting really good at that until you feel like moving on. But then there'll always be somewhere you can go with the skills that you've picked up in what you've been doing. It's all very interlinked.
Oh, great. Thank you. And another attendee here said, excellent presentation. They'd be interested to know, what has been the most interesting project you've worked on and why?
So probably that's hard because I've done a lot of different projects and they've all had their sort of different unique characteristics. But I do have a particular site which was, so I started on the pretty much the 1st of September. And I think my first visit to this site was about the 15th of September. And I've sort of never left. So it was where I learnt the ropes as how to do a lot of the different site work techniques. It was then my first kind of tester site when I started running the logistics. It was the first one I did the financial management for. It was the first one where I started leading the client conversation. So I guess part of the reason why I love it is because it's just been with me a really long time. It's been a massive learning ground. The people are really lovely, which has always helped. But from a technical perspective, it's just an absolutely fascinating site. It's a chemical manufacturing facility where they make really bespoke chemicals. So they sort of design, build their own molecules and then put those into production. So they have absolutely unique issues at that site because of the specifics of what they've been making there. So it's not like a kind of petrol filling station where you already know what you're going to find. It's the kind of site where you have to start really opening your net wide open to make sure you're picking things up. It's also in a very sensitive location. It's on a chalk aquifer. It's right next to a really significant river. There's a SSSI next door. It's been there since the 30s. So the production has changed massively over time. And I could devote my entire career just to that site and probably not know everything about it by the time I retired. There's so much going on, and it's just such a brilliant case study of bringing land condition into so many different places, because we've done remediation attempts on there, we've looked at natural source zone depletion assessments on there, we've done drilling there, we've done packer tests there, we've done planning consents, we've done permitting, we've helped them get a solar farm set up, just done so many different things. It's almost been like my sandbox for how to do my job properly on what is a very technically complicated site, but that you can kind of pull apart in stages and feel like you're kind of learning something every time you go there, even now, 16 years on.
Amazing. That sounds so interesting. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And what advice would you give to a graduate looking to get into the industry?
I think be realistic about what you want. One of the realities is, and this is only my personal opinion, so obviously take it as it's intended, but I really strongly feel that you just benefit so much from going out and doing site work whilst you can. It's the best way of learning what it all means and what it looks like, because when you're come to a point in your career where you're looking at other people's notes about what soils they encountered and what it looked like, what it smelt like, what it felt like, how it interacted, it's really hard to actually get to grips with what that means. It's really hard to have a picture in your head of our colour change from orange to dark grey. But when you're actually there on site going, no, seriously, this was like someone had taken a marker pen to it. It really brings it to life. And I think that because site work can be quite challenging. Not everyone enjoys being out in all weathers. Not everyone enjoys having to kind of run a team all the time, but just have a bit of a think about the value of that early stage stuff and sort of where it gets you in the longer term. And I guess don't be too quick to try and leave that stuff behind and kind of jump to the office side of things. The office side of things is fun, but you get to do a lot of the office thinking when you're out on site anyway. So yeah, just kind of bed in those skills, get that experience whilst you can. And like in my case, before my knees gave way and I couldn't really do it anymore, it was the best time where I could actually go out and see these things in real life. And also just enjoy it whilst you can, because you do just get this kind of free reign to just travel all over the place and meet all these different people and go to these different places and stay in different cities. There's an awful lot of nice little perks which go alongside with being a site consultant. So yeah, just kind of get out there, enjoy it, and just keep saying yes to opportunities, really.
Great, thank you. And how do you feel your job has changed since COVID? I imagine this is slightly related to the data collection one as well that we talked about.
Yeah, so COVID was unsurprisingly an interesting time for everyone. It was, I think it was not as bad as we first thought it might be, in the sense that obviously when COVID really first kicked off, there was a massive question mark over, like, does this just grind everything to a halt? Can we even get on site anymore? As it turned out, it was very, very quickly decided that, country couldn't afford for construction to just stop. And like I say, quite often the work that we're doing is very closely aligned with the construction industry. And that's not always like, oh, someone's knocking up a block of houses, that's construction, we're there. Even, industrial sites, places which need knocking down, acquisitions, divestments, it kind of links in. So luckily we were able to keep site work going a lot, which was great. But obviously it brought in an enormous amount of new health and safety kind of conversation into it. We had a really an interesting challenge about even just the physical nature of things like drilling rigs, because if you look at where the controls for the rigs are, where your lead driller stands versus where your supporting driller needs to be able to do their part of the job versus where you are looking at the soil out, trying to look at the different distances between those and suddenly having to think about how you're laying out your work area and how you're keeping people away. It just brought all these other considerations in, but none of those were really insurmountable. And certainly for the guys who I know who were doing site work in that time, I think they actually found it a bit of a lifeline, because obviously so many people were completely kind of stranded at home, just like in a box by themselves, couldn't really interact with anyone else. And even though, there were these extra restrictions, I think people found it just such a boon that they could still actually go out to work and work on a site with other human beings. And yeah, maybe they're not within 2 meters of you, but at least you can actually see someone in the flesh. I think the biggest sort of change in terms of, I don't really necessarily see it going back to how it was before, is just around the office culture. Especially now we're sort of seeing our newer graduates and people who have spent so much of their education kind of doing it all remotely. It's really hard for everyone. It's such I really sympathize. I don't know how they're doing such a great job, because it must be so challenging to start a new job at a new company and not be able to just go in and have an office full of people who are there 5 days a week. So I think that there's definitely, probably in all industries, not just land condition, but we all need to be a little bit more cognizant of making ourselves available for those things, because especially when you're like at the point where I am, I could do my work just as well from home, unless I need to go and talk to a client face to face or whatever. But I make sure I go into the office because I want to make sure that other people who need to be in there have someone they can talk to. And just, I think, thinking about how we're upskilling people. Obviously, you used to learn quite a lot about just kind of through osmosis. You'd hear someone having a conversation about a site whilst they were making a cup of tea, and you'd just be like, oh, that's a bit interesting. What's that about? What's going on here? We sort of are losing all of that casual learning, which just kind of happens. So I think we all need to kind of collectively make more effort to kind of force ourselves back into those situations where that starts happening. But certainly, I think that a lot of people, certainly who come into my company, because we do get people out on site and we do get people learning these things, I'd like to think hopefully they're a little bit protected from some of that isolation, because they are immediately going out into a work team or, shadowing someone or doing those kinds of things. But yeah, I'm not sure that we'll ever get back to everyone routinely being 5 days in the office. So I think we'll need to make more conscious time to make sure that we're supporting each other and keeping a community going.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Elaine. I'm really sorry, everyone. That looks like we're out of time now for any more questions, but thank you to all of you who put questions in. And thank you to you, Elaine, for such an interesting presentation. Just a reminder to the attendees watching that are IES members, you can record your attendance at this webinar using the IES CPD tool, which you can find in the members area. And this webinar has been recorded and it will be made available on our website and our YouTube channel. Just to flag up that the next IES event is on the 27th of March and is an EIA community debate on designing infrastructure for climate resilience. And you can register for this on our website. Another final thank you to you, Elaine, for your presentation, and have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.